Good morning, everyone. This is Tom with CertifID. I'm just going to give just about 60 seconds for everybody to pour into the Zoom webinar here, and then we will get started. So sit tight. We'll be back and get things kicked off in about 45 seconds here. All right, thanks everyone for your patience. For those of you that I haven't had the privilege to meet, I'm Tom Cronkright. I'm one of the co-founders of CertifID, large title agent here in Michigan, and we have a really cool special guest in Lindsay. I'll introduce her in a second, and we're going to profile a contractor fraud, something with all the construction going on around the country, both in the residential and commercial side. We thought it very timely to take a minute and look at this transaction profile. For those of you that are new to the webinar series, every month we do our best to bring up a topic that is trending in the area of cybersecurity, particularly fraud and wire fraud in real estate transactions. Thanks to everyone. We've had thousands of people register for this series, and we will be publishing this on our new website. More to come on that. But without further ado, we'll probably be wrapping this one up a little bit early, depending on how questions come in the discussion. But we have Lindsay Guerrero. Did I say that right, Lindsay?
You did.
Lindsay she's a very accomplished individual in this space. Gotten to know her and her team quite well over the last several months, which I consider a huge benefit and blessing. She is the Iowa Title Guarantee Director. So if you remember, Iowa Title, the state of Iowa put together their own fund to administer the guarantee around the exchange of title. She administers and manages several hundred closing agents and attorneys. So very much like a underwriter agency relationship, but all confined within the state. She's a practicing attorney, member of the Iowa State Bar and real estate title law section of that association. She is a member of the ILTA and the Commercial Real Estate for Women's Association. So, Lindsay, thanks so much. I mean, you're top of the house there. Love the fact that you're a lawyer. Other people would disagree with that. I think it's a benefit. So, as we go through this, and what we want to talk about today in profile was a commercial construction file. Well, Lindsay, why don't you read us into it? Let's set the table for the audience on what the transaction was, and then I'll kind of guide through what happened that resulted ultimately in money landing in the wrong account.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me. Happy to be here, and thank you to CertifID. Before we get started, I will just say they saved us. But so pretty much what happened is we do commercial construction draws as part of our commercial coverage, and we were on the 4th or 5th draw in a transaction, and we got one of those emails where, they say, well, we're changing our wire instructions at the last minute, which is a red flag. And so we immediately called. This is an interesting scenario where our contact in the transaction was the developer, not the general contractor directly. And so the developer was sort of being the medium in between ourselves and the payee, the general contractor. And so he had forwarded us the fraudulent wire instructions and said, hey, they're changing them. And we immediately called him and said, are you sure this is them? Because it's the day of, it's, that's a red flag to us that it's probably not them. And he said, no, it is. So we said, okay, we'll listen to you. And what we should have done, or best practice would be to obviously communicate with the general contractor directly by independently verifying. And now we use CertifID, but we didn't. And so basically we wired nearly $700,000 to a fraudulent account. That's the short story. There's some other interesting details that were at play here. One being that we were having issues with their existing account we had previously received a lot of fraud notifications and were having problems with it, even though it was their valid account. So when, another factor to consider was we thought, well, maybe they're just changing their account because they were having so many issues with their current account. And it was throwing fraud flags and holding up wires when it was indeed the actual account. So a lot at play there. That's the very quick version of it. But
yeah, I think what's interesting about that, and we were just talking before we started the session here, is that there were some pre-existing conditions, no pun intended, being that this is a commercial construction draw, but you had paid the contractor, so you're communicating with the developer who ultimately is sharing information of the contractor that is building the structure, right? That's the one receiving the payment. And you had made payments before, and you were having problems getting those payments to the contractor because the bank was rejecting or flagging. But there was a history there where it wasn't fraud, but it just wasn't a smooth payment process. So I think that's a very interesting note as we go through the emails. The second is something that I really want the audience to key in on, is this idea that you have a third party exchanging the wiring information or the bank credentials for someone else. And whenever you do that, and as Lindsay mentioned, we have to be authenticating down to the beneficiary account level of who's receiving the funds. It doesn't matter that, hey, I paid this account 10 times before. This is an 18-month draw process, and we're on draw 16, and now there's a change, and I've always, that doesn't matter anymore, because you'll see here that they interjected themselves impersonating what I believe is the developer, because the contractor looks like they had been hacked. So the question is, am I even communicating with this trusted party, or have they been spoofed because somebody that's actually receiving the funds has been compromised? So the same with split closings. There's been a lot of, we'll probably do a webinar on this soon. There's just markets where the listing agent, the seller, is closing at one title company, and the selling agent, the buyer, is closing at a different company. And because the buyer's title company handles dispersing, because they have to ensure the first lien position of the mortgage holder that's coming in on the buyer side, they have to handle all the dispersing, right? So the challenge is the other title company provides the mortgage payoff, sends it over to you, and you've trusted them for years. They're a friendly competitor, or you recognize them even as an underwriter in the area as a direct operation, but you don't verify that payoff, and all of a sudden the money lands in the fraudulent account. It's the same exact play. I'm drawing a parallel. So it doesn't matter if this was a construction draw, this was a seller of proceeds, this was a mortgage payoff. The idea here being, have we kind of verified down to the account holder or the beneficiary level where that money's going to land? So, all right, without further ado, let's dive in a little bit more graphically on the time frame here. So I'll voice over this quickly. As Lindsay mentioned, there was initial contact. We're going to show you these emails on the 28th. The fraudster makes initial contact with the developer. It just so happens that we had met. We were talking on a whole nother channel, ITG and Certified, and then on the 30th, like, you just can't make a timeline like this up. On the 30th of June, so all this is happening in like a few-day process, the fraudster asked to swap out wiring instructions in connection with this ongoing commercial construction project, for which ITG, Iowa Title Guarantee, was administering the payments. And then the money was ultimately lands in a fraudulent account, which we'll show you. And then we were notified to help engage in the recovery of funds, and happy to report, other than what I call a mule payment of 20 or so thousand, we were able to get a bulk of that back, and now sitting here on lessons learned. So one, Lindsay, I want to thank you and the state of Iowa for just having the courage and the transparency to talk about this for education purposes, because I'm a huge believer that all these things leave clues, and those clues can add up to additional best practice that we can take back into our workflows and into our communities. So with that, let's do a quick overview of the type of communication. And what I find interesting about this, Lindsay had to read me into this a couple times, because I was trying to figure out who was the fraudster impersonating? From what we believe, and we have a really strong suspicion that the contractor, the one receiving the payment, was likely compromised, and the developer, the communication was flowing through developer up to ITG to share credentials around payment. But Lindsay, if you don't mind, just tell me when to advance. But let's walk through the few days of communication that led to that transfer.
Sure. So I think it was Monday is when they initially had emailed the developer. And if you look at some of these emails, you think if anyone had actually read these, it would be a red flag and you would say, no way. But what happened is it was deep in, as you know, if you're CC'd or down the chain, nobody scrolls to the first email. They were sort of forwards upon forwards. And that's why nobody picked up on it. But basically the fraudster posed as the contractor, emailing the developer saying, please, our next draw payment should be to our updated Wells Fargo account. And then the developer forwarded it on to us and said they changed it, as I mentioned, which is these two emails here, and confirmed when we said, okay, we'll confirm wire instructions and then change it to the Wells Fargo account. And then the second email here is him confirming with the fraudster, which he thinks is the general contractor, that we in fact will change the wire instructions and wire to the new account.
So we talk a lot about, I'll continue to interrupt or interject, Lindsay, like any
please do.
When we talk about, or when we're educating, what Lindsay, we were on with your group yesterday, the idea of updated and new instructions, the use of the word kindly. We're going to highlight some of those things for everyone to notice that those are truly common denominators that should just create a break point, meaning a pause point to consider. But Lindsay's bringing up a good point. Some of these email strings, I mean, they go on for pages and pages and pages. And all I'm trying to do is get this stupid draw out because we're closing in at the end of the month. I mean, look at the time frame here, right? We got to get this thing out so that we settle the books for the month of June for work that was likely done in May, right? You're always kind of a month behind. And the first email from the spoofed or compromised contractor to the developer says, look, send it to Wells Fargo. What's interesting is that they were already having problems with the Green State Credit Union account. So the fraudster knew that Green State Credit Union was the primary bank, and now they're introducing Wells Fargo. And again, probably read emails that there was friction around getting prior draws into Green State. It might seem subtle, but it just makes it that much more believable as, you know, the contractor, the developer is, you know, reading this email in this case from the fraudster. And that's the subtlety, guys, that makes these things, I'd say, less questions, you know, if that's a phrase, it's not proper English, but it just lowers your guard, right? It makes you think, okay, finally, we can get these payments out on a smoother basis. So this is going to be a long process. So the next set of emails are still on. So let's look at, we're on Monday the 28th. Tuesday, we have a correspondence. Now we're on Wednesday. So Lindsay, walk us through a couple of correspondence on Wednesday.
Yeah, so I think the timeline was that we took the couple days to try to verify, obviously. And I will say that we know on our end best practices to confirm with the actual recipient of the funds, and that is in our written policies and procedures. And all it takes, of course, is one relationship or one person to not do that, which is what happened here. Because like I said, our written policy was that you always communicate directly with the recipient. And unfortunately, that didn't happen because we had this relationship with the developer and we trusted that that person was validating. And unfortunately, that didn't occur. But on Wednesday, after we'd gone through that whole process, the contractor says, of course, we'll look out for it in our account after he'd said, okay, we'll make the change. And then the contractor does something very odd, which threw us all for a loop. But that evening said, and again, this is the spoofed contractor, the fraudster, not the actual contractor, said we could not receive the money in our Wells Fargo account, which is the fraudulent account, due to it being a new account. So I don't know if there was something that spooked them where they thought they weren't going to get the funds. But the weird part is that they said, kindly recall the wire and send it back to the Green State Credit Union account, which was the actual correct account. We had never received fraudulent instructions for Green State. So it was odd that they were saying, don't send it to the fraudulent account, send it to the correct account. And by that point, it was too late. We had already sent the wire out, but just interesting correspondence coming from a fraudster. Like I said, I don't know if they were spooked or why they sent this, but it happened. So
I have some suspicions, and again, these are just theories looking at this. A couple things. If they had full access to the contractor's account and the network of that contractor, is it possible that they had access to the actual credit union account credentials where the money would go in and immediately wire it? We haven't seen that before. Well, it's not true. We have seen that in 2 instances. There were much smaller amounts. That's one theory. The other theory is that what I learned recently, and I asked federal law enforcement about this, is what is the difference, or what are the factors that lead to money moving quickly out of a receiving account versus money that could be there for days or weeks? Meaning, hey, I get tricked, I wire to Fraudster. What's the difference between, what are the attributes of the fraud or the people where the money could go into cryptocurrency within a few hours versus money that could potentially sit in an account and be recalled for, again, days or weeks? And what was interesting is they bucketed into essentially 2 groups. And this is just another working theory. One group is they're professional money launderers. They're looking for the wire, they're asking for confirmation, which I don't see here. And they're ready to move the money very quickly. We were brought into a recovery last Thursday. We've had one a day now. We had last Thursday, $160-some thousand buyer cash to close funds moved, and almost fully depleted in cryptocurrency when the Federal Reserve closed at evening, last Thursday evening. But for those so those are what we call the professional jobs. The others, typically these emails are being administered overseas. The wiring instructions are coming from overseas, but there's a domestic money mule that's holding the account. So if those money mules are part of online dating scams in particular, what's interesting is the receiver of the funds, let's say the person domestically that thinks they're in this romance overseas, if they have some type of a gripe about the relationship or something that hasn't been settled, a lot of times federal authorities, when they interview these people and they say, well, did you get a request to transfer funds? And they'll say, yeah, well, why didn't you follow that request? Well, because so-and-so promised me something else and he didn't do that, or she didn't do that, so I wasn't going to do this. So they can create leverage points in the relationship, I suppose like any relationship, but they're holding up, potentially hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. So again, 2 working theories here. Very, very odd that the fraudster would say, hey, even though we gave you fraudulent wiring instructions to Wells Fargo, we want you to recall that wire and send it to the same credit union account, Lindsay, that you're confirming you paid before. Okay? All right, don't mean to belabor that. Now we're on, let me just look at the timeline. So that gave us through the end of June. Now we're just before the holiday, July 1. And walk us through these final.
Yeah, so the first one, I believe is still the fraudster. They're inquiring as to what's the status with the wire. I don't know if Wells Fargo had held it up because it was flagged as a fraudulent transfer for some reason. We're not really sure here. And then again, the developer is saying, because we'd had issues with Green State, why are we always having problems with your instructions? Are these your instructions? Like, what are your instructions? Because it's continues to be an issue. And he's basically asking them to confirm because we've had so many problems. And then we have that same day, the fraudster says we couldn't get the wire in our Wells Fargo. The bank said the wire is something on your end. Kindly recall it with our attached wire instructions that we've already, and I can't remember if there's an attachment on there or if they were just referring back to the green state, but we had already wired it out at this point. So there was no going back. And then the second email here is the developer emailing us saying, you know, apologize for the inconvenience, but apparently their account rejected the wire and you need to send it to another account. And that's when we responded, it's already gone. So if this isn't your account, let us know. And I don't know that the emails are in the slide deck because I don't think they were in sort of the chain of emails that I had forwarded on to CertifID because I think they were in a separate, you know how it goes if you don't respond to the exact email. But there was other emails basically from the fraudster saying, oh, don't worry about it. We got it and we'll just move it into the account that it should be. So there was some later communication indicating that, yes, they had received it. Don't worry about it. All is well. And that was the end of that until 7 days later when we, I believe what happened is the real contractor reached out to the developer and said, where's our payment? We don't have payment. So of course, that's when we all start panicking. And they're claiming, you know, the funds should have been returned to you if you attempted to wire them out. We don't have them. And we said they weren't returned to us. They were successful. And that's when we immediately contacted our bank to let them know it was a fraudulent transfer. And we fortuitously met Tom and Matt and the others at CertifID one day, or I guess 1 week prior at that point. And we said, oh my gosh, thank goodness that we met them. And the same day, Tom was able to work with the authorities and get the accounts frozen that they were moved into. So just incredibly grateful for the quick response. Like I said, it was same day that we had some sort of indication of what had gone on, but it was 7 days before the actual contractor, the real contractor, had said anything to us that hey, we don't have money. So for 7 days we sat and thought that everything was fine, and clearly it wasn't. So
yeah, just a crazy story, and I'm too grateful because this is one where federal law enforcement, knowing that there was a state entity, not that they play favorites, but we all put a lot of weight into into this one, which was great. But you know, at some point, there's also a bit of just chance and luck as well, because the money could have moved easily within that 7-day period. Right? So great result, not entirely whole, but again, somebody was watching out because they took 20,000 out, which we weren't able to get our hands on. But I say overall, most people are not that fortunate. So I guess what I want to pivot to, Lindsay, and then we can wrap up here in 10 minutes or so. And I'd like, if anybody has questions, put them in the, let me see the bar here, put it in the Q&A panel if you'd like. I mean, rarely can we talk to a state, you're not a regulator, but you kind of like have this, aura about you in the sense that you're managing this process for the entire state. Let's open up the dialogue a bit and just do a post game on, because I think the value of these conversations in these instances, and for those of you that are on the webinar today, there's a lot of learning. I call it tuition. So we can pay the tuition up front and we can lean into issues and we can learn from them, and we can mitigate these instances in our risk profile, or we pay tuition on the back end when we have to learn more the hard way or the more intense way, that we survive something like this, and now we've got to kind of level up. So Lindsay, in your words, not mine, like walk us through, I guess, the thought process. What did it feel like? It sounds like maybe this was the first time that you had been through something like this, and certainly at this level, you probably heard, and you were very well aware of wire fraud and the risks that some of the closing agents and attorneys that are approved in Iowa have, but just curious on like what that felt like and the progression afterwards to make sure this doesn't happen again, or certainly lower the instance of it happening as much as possible.
Yeah, no, it's obviously it was a huge shock because we are, I think more so than probably those out there in the field that are relying on us to give them guidance on how to handle these situations. we were very cautious about how, I mean, obviously in this instance, there were some balls dropped, but we have extensive policies and procedures written, multiple people involved in the approval process or the verification process, just so you don't have one person that's, verifying the wires and then wiring out and et cetera. So on our end, what should have happened should have been best practice. So if it can happen to us, it can happen to anybody, because we, consider ourselves one of the more cautious and conservative when it comes to money and things of this nature. So as far as how we adapted, obviously we improved, enhanced our the policies and procedures that we had currently, just with different verification procedures, how they're going to independently verify information, and again, contact the actual recipient directly, which was already in our previous policies and procedures, but we just sort of emphasized that in the new ones. But then we adopted CertifID just because it makes it, gives you so much more confidence and assurance that the person you're speaking with is that person. You never know if there could be bad information on the internet as well, or they set up fake websites and things too. So just knowing, having that assurance that CertifID verifies the identity of the person with which you're communicating. And that's how we're receiving our wire instructions going forward. And we, you get some folks that say, oh, this is kind of a hassle, just because anybody that has to do one more step or do anything additional. But nowadays, I mean, that's what everybody says about two-factor authentication. It's not, has nothing to do with CertifID. It's just because two-factor requires that you take 2 steps in something, and people are hesitant to adopt that, but it's incredibly important. And after people have done it, they're like, oh, that's a lot easier than I thought. I think the initial response is, oh, we have to do another step. I don't want to do that. But then when they actually go through the process and see how quick it is, it's less than a minute they get through the validation, and then it's done. So I think it's just that, people are resistant to change, but really it's worth it. And of course, if you educate them of all the benefits and why it's important, I think they're willing to take that 30 extra seconds to avoid having their money transferred to a fraudster. So it's been great. Our team loves it. Our clients have loved it. So just incredibly thankful for everything that Certify has done for us. And I will just say that we work with a lot of vendors out there, and I will say CertifID is probably one of, if not the most responsive as far as promptness goes. So that's been wonderful as well, the entire team. So thank you.
Your check's in the mail, Lindsay. Thank you.
I mean it. Yeah. We can't do that as a state agency. We're not allowed to, we can't accept any gifts over like $3 or something, but.
Oh, that's great. No. So if I dissect this a little bit, so you had a strong policy, human error, unfortunately, overrode that policy because of a pre-existing relationship. I think that is the number one lesson in the talk today, is that while we want to be able to trust and make it convenient, hey, he's our biggest client, he's a developer we just onboarded, we promised a smooth process. Well, that's great, but when it comes down to funding, when it comes down to the exchange of funds, this is an area that through education and awareness, you can get them on board. We see this all the time. What's one more step? Blah, blah, blah. Well, there has to be one more step. You were going to administer a callback anyway, right? Or you should be. You're going to hunt this person down and verify, and we have the ability through our platform to do that kind of on their terms. I didn't share this with you, Lindsay, but we had a customer in the Midwest 3 weeks ago that was administering the exact same transaction. It was a construction draw. They were communicating for about 12 days with the fraudster, back and forth on, updated sworn statement, getting the lien waivers, the full draw request, final numbers. Thankfully, they spun up certified, sent it to the builder that was receiving the funds. And we immediately identified that the device was being controlled out of Nigeria, and that they had been communicating with a fraudster the entire 12-day period. once the house, once everything kind of opens up and you're like, oh my goodness. So that's exactly what it's intended to be. So I see here that there was an override of process because of relationship. And I think from a people perspective, and I know that you did this, having gotten to know you, is the time to level up and say, look, guys, these policies are in place for a reason. They can't be broken. There's no exceptions. And we have to verify now down to an account level. And then you implement certified to enable that verification to take place with enhanced technology and flow. So is that fair, Lindsay? And now you're talking about it, which I think is really cool, because so many people just, hey, you can mention it, but don't mention my name. We were involved. I had another one last night, so we're up to 111 recoveries for the year, a little over 35 million back to victims. And these victims are, half of them have been disbursement level, the other half have been incoming, mostly with consumers. So Lindsay, thanks again for sharing your story. If you want to hang out, I'm going to spend 5 minutes walking through the new website, which you're welcome to hang out. Otherwise, let me know. I know you guys have crazy busy volume and days these days leading up to the holiday.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I will at least turn off my video to give you the center stage, but thank you again, and we will talk soon.
No, thanks, Lindsay. Really appreciate it, you and your team. All right, guys, we are excited that we have a new website that we launched over the weekend. We've been working on this as a team for the past several months. The idea being a much more robust platform for you and your consumers to educate themselves about wire fraud, to educate themselves about the risks associated with these types of transactions, and just the ability to consume over different media, either white papers, all of our blogs, all of our webinars, all of our white papers, everything is baked into this resources tab. If you're looking at new hires, or you're doing monthly or quarterly trainings, if you're doing lunch and learns, pull up one of these and just spend 20 or 30 minutes walking through some of these materials with your referral partners. I think the other thing I know that Lindsay did, and her team and everyone does, is there's always an opportunity to recruit the people that we're doing business with, to encourage them to look at their own cybersecurity, their own cyber hygiene. She mentioned multi-factor authentication, reviewing email policies. Like, this is what this resources page is meant to do, is to enable you internally and externally to have a broader resource stack to go out and socialize this issue. We also have solutions by role. So if you think about, hey, you're a home buyer, you're a home seller, you're a closing attorney or law firm, you're a title agent. We went through and we've got a kind of a guide, if you will, based on who you identify with. Are you an agent? I'm interested in sending wiring instructions and I'm on Resware. So, or I'm on SoftPro, or whatever the platform is. So take a look at that. It's an easy link also to send to home buyers and sellers from an education perspective, or to your real estate agents that are referring you those transactions to educate them on what we're doing. There's a founder story. There's Lawrence and I. This was a one take. We were pressed for time, but we know our story well. And we just kind of walked through why we're doing what we're doing and what led us on this path. We'd love for you guys to spend a minute, take a look at that. It just underscores the texture of why we're doing, like I say, on a mission to eradicate this horrible threat from real estate transactions. And for those of you, we'll wrap up early today. If we have not connected, that is my direct email and my phone number, Liz. We'll gladly take the call and schedule time if you want to talk about this or other things that either as current customers, how we expand into the workflow, or things that we're looking at from a best practice standpoint going into next year, as it seems like the market's leveling out a little bit. Or for those of you that want to learn more, would love to continue the conversation that we're having today. And if you haven't already, connect with me on LinkedIn. We're constantly posting up just some things around articles on cybersecurity, fraud prevention, things that are very interesting and trending in market. So with that, Lindsay, I can't thank you enough again. Appreciate that. And this has been a great series this year, guys. We're going to make it even better next year. And I really appreciate the time today. And with that, we will close out and give you the gift of time back this morning. So take care. Have an awesome rest of the week.